Hi, comic book friends. This is Eric from longboxreview.com. Welcome to the show. Hey, it's been a while since I've recorded a proper Longbox Review episode, and by proper I mean where I actually talk about some comics. So I went ahead and looked at my episode list, and I see that I haven't recorded an episode discussing comics since July. It's only been a few numbered episodes, but I haven't done it in a while. And I realized that I'm not really much of a comic book podcast if I don't actually talk about the comic book. So here I am to rectify that little oversight. I should be releasing many comic book related episodes in the near future, starting with this one. Today I'm going to talk about several number one comics that I've read recently. Please keep in mind that I may be discussing possible spoilerific stuff, so if you prefer not to be spoiled on these things, go read the comics and then come back and listen to the show. First up is one of the comics that I was very excited to see in previews, and that is SIP Kids by Terry Moore. So while 2013 may have been the 20th anniversary of Strangers in Paradise, Terry Moore is continuing the celebration with this special, what I thought was a one-shot, but appears to be the first part of a continuing series, I suppose, because while SIP Kids number 1 came out just recently, I see that in the October previews that number 2 is coming out just in time for Christmas. So I'm really looking forward to that. So you may ask, what is SIP Kids, just in case you missed it, and a shame if you did, because this is really great work by Terry Moore. This is also done by Steve Hamaker, I believe, who did the colors on this. So Terry Moore is mostly known for his black and white comics work, but he released this SIP Kids with a colored version. Of course, that means the price is slightly higher than his usual books. This number 1 was priced at $4.99, but I tell you what, it was totally worth it. If you're a fan of Strangers in Paradise, and I don't understand why you are not, it's such a great series, it really is. I've mentioned it a few times on this podcast. So it's nice to revisit those characters in this new and interesting way, with Terry Moore approaching the characters as children in a Peanuts-like manner. The plot's pretty simple. It revolves around mostly a couple soccer games, or football for the international audience out there, along with Kachu being basically mean to a few people and her trying to make amends. So she calls Freddie Femer some names, which upsets him. Francine calls Kachu on this, and then Kachu basically attacks Francine for defending Freddie, which of course makes her feel really bad. We also get to see a little bit of Kachu's living situation in a very poor part of the town. There's an amusing but also sad scene where she is up on her roof looking up at the sky, and then she starts to break into song. I think she's starting to sing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. No, she starts to sing Somewhere Out There, and I'm not that's as close to singing as I will get here. And then I presume her mother is the one who throws a bottle of liquor at her, yelling at her to shut up. So you get a little bit of that poor home life of Kachu's. All of your favorite SIP characters are in here. Like I said, you've got Kachu and Francine, Freddie, you've got David, you've got Tamby, Darcy. I think that's pretty much it. There's a beautiful scene at the second soccer game, the football game here, where Freddie gets hit on the head with a soccer ball. He kind of goes loopy, starts spouting out, "I'm a choo-choo." And then he falls over. Francine comes over and hovers over him, calling his name, and he just looks up at her all lovingly. And then we get this beautiful 4-panel black and white spread where suddenly Francine is the adult Francine, or young adult anyway, because Freddy looks to be pretty young still. Or no. So this is him. It looks like this is a more realistic version of the kid Freddy in this SIP universe. But he says, "Francine, I dreamed we were kids, and wow, you're beautiful." And I just want to tell you, if you haven't seen this, it is the picture that Terry Moore drew of Francine is just gorgeous. It is one of the most beautiful renderings of a woman I've seen in a comic book. And that goes on for a little bit. And like I said, 4 panels. And then Kachu has had enough and yells out "reboot," and then knocks him on the head with a soccer ball again. And now we're back into the SIP kids world once again. And then there's a lovely comical scene where Francine wants Freddy to tell her again how beautiful she is, and knocks him on the head with a soccer ball. Kachu takes her turn. Francine, Kachu. It's all played for laughs. Much like the Peanuts strip often tried to do. And then at the very end, we find out that the team that they were going to play the game with has forfeited. They can't make it. So the league sent somebody else, and it's the Manson Maulers. And so you get some of the characters from the Rachel Rising series, cross-pollinating, if you will, here in the SIP universe. So they're all connected yet again. And then the final caption at the very bottom says, "The end?" ? And of course, when I first read this, like I said, I was very excited to see this comic coming out, and then I see the question mark there. And I'm like, oh, can there be more? Please, can there be more SIP kids? And like I said at the top of this, that here we are. We're going to get a number 2 version of this, which I, of course, pre-ordered. It's probably not too late for you to add that to your list at your local comic book shop. Or if you're like me, you buy a lot of your stuff from DCBS, and you can go ahead and email them and ask them to add that to your pull list coming this December. I highly recommend it. And if you can, pick up the number 1 issue if it's still around somewhere. Hopefully he'll come out with a trade of this if we get enough issues. I mean, I think we'll probably need at least 4 before the trade will come out. So keep an eye out for that, I suppose. But really, you should just go buy the issues. They're just a wonderful and darling read. Okay, next up, from Boom Studios, George Pérez's Sirens, 1 of 6. Okay, here we are again. Another comic book, another number 1 issue that really excited me when I saw this in previews. It's George Pérez doing what he does best, doing the art. He's writing the story, which I'll get into a little bit as we go along here. But it's George Pérez doing comics again, which is wonderful to me. George Pérez was the guy, was the artist, I guess the first artist that I just kind of fell in love with when I got into comics. When New Teen Titans came out and he was doing that. So I quickly learned to love his work. And when I was doing my own drawings, my own comic book art, if you will, his was the model that I followed. And for many years, I considered George Pérez the yardstick by which other artists were measured, unfairly or not. But he's back. He's doing the art on this. Let's see. It says here, written, illustrated, and created by George Pérez. Colors by Leonardo Pacioretty. I probably just butchered that. And letters by Ed Dukeshire. Like I said, this is from Boom Studios. It's a limited series, 1 of 6, but it is intended, if all goes well, because I did some research on this particular book for a few reasons that I'll get into a little bit later. Mr. Pérez hopes that this will resonate with those of us out here and in comic book land, and hopefully there'll be other limited series to follow to expand upon this new universe he's created. And what is this universe? Well, there are two answers to this, and one answer is what I read on the interwebs with interviews that Mr. Pérez did with various outlets, and then there's my interpretation of the book before I read all that stuff. So let's get into that first. So Sirens is at least number one, is about a bunch of women characters in all different time periods who are getting collected together in the far future for some reason. And so basically the bulk of the plot of this first issue is introducing these characters and then getting the band together, so to speak. The focus of this cross-time adventure story are of the following characters. So we first see Phoenicia, I believe, who is a mystic who we are shown at first in 12th century Iceland. And she meets up with a dragon. And then the scene shifts. We get introduced to Agonia, also known as Agony. And she's a gladiator in 2nd century Rome who is a character who loves to fight and seems to get real excited when there's lots of blood flowing around her when she's the cause of it. There is Miss Bishop also, I found out later. It's not necessarily in this book, I don't think. Maybe I missed it. But her quote-unquote hero name is Ammo. She's a school teacher / gunslinger in 19th century, the Arizona territory of the 19th century. There's also a character called Vizcara, also known as Highness. That's usually what she's called and goes by. And we see her because she's a prisoner in this future that I mentioned, and she's kind of the central character out of this group of women, at least as far as I saw. There's also Sharita, who is a domestic worker in an inventor's home in 1949. She also goes by, or will go by at least, Interface. It's really interesting. She doesn't talk except through a radio that one of the characters brings with her. I'll get to that in a minute. But I thought that was really interesting. And then there are the other characters that the series is supposed to focus on. I mean, but there's a lot of different supporting characters as well. But Figurine, Skywire, and Kaja, I believe, are the other 3 main characters. So there are 9 main characters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm missing one. Let's see, who am I missing? Oh, Bombshell. Bombshell is the other one. So yeah, there are 9 main characters. There's also a 2-page spread scene. Excuse me. There's also a scene shown in a 2-page spread of a bunch of other characters in various timelines as well. But I think we only see some of them in those particular panels. My interpretation of this is, like I said, we're introduced to all these characters, and it's Phoenicia who seems to be behind collecting these women in the future for some particular purpose. I'm not exactly sure what that purpose is. Even after rereading the comic, I wasn't entirely certain of what that is. At the very end, a character called Nyada shows up. She works for someone named Perdition as Perdition's enforcer, and she says something really interesting. She's very antagonistic to the characters that we've been shown so far. And the way she appears to be the quote unquote bad guy just by the way she looks. She's got hair or it looks like hair, but about a third of her face is covered in darkness, but her right eye glows red. She's wearing spiked armor. She's wearing dark colors. Her ship is the one that attacks the ship full of these women, the Sirens. So she comes across as the bad guy. But what she says is, the sanctity of reality that you so desecrated will be restored and avenged. And then the comic closes with Nyada's ship attacking I believe that the ship is called the Paradox. So when I first read this, it intrigued me because it seemed like what looked like the bad guy character is maybe really the good guy, and who we think of as the good guys are really not the good guys. So I thought that was interesting, and I was looking forward to finding out more about that. Unfortunately, I did some research, and so this is what the story is supposed to be about. There is an interview with Mr. Pérez on Comic Book Resources, and these are Pérez's words. The Sirens are all characters who exist in a far-flung future and who have hidden out in various points in Earth's history after a dramatic event that branded them as criminals in their own time. He talks about some of the characters, blah, blah, blah. Oh, to add to that, he says, when the heroines are recalled to the future, it's because a new threat has arisen that jeopardizes their hopes of being vindicated as well as threatening the destruction of the Earth. And that's where we are in the story. So, quite a bit different from what I got out of my first read and a half, if you will, of Sirens #1. So, was I just a lazy reader and I didn't pick up on the clues presented in here? I don't know. I need to go back and reread it now, knowing what I know of the story from the creator's lips, to see if indeed everything is there, or did Pérez not give me enough in this particular story to glean everything that he summarized in this interview. So let me talk about Mr. Pérez as a creator, writer, artist with the series. So the art in here is very much, Pérez doing Pérez. Wonderful panels, lots of different characters. Everybody has an individual face. Although I do have to admit, some of the main female characters, I wondered if they were the same character, just from different timelines, perhaps. And because I was kind of reading into the whole paradox thing. They mentioned paradox, and not just the ship called Paradox, but time paradoxes. Phoenicia actually says something about a time paradox as well. So I thought maybe some of these characters might be the same, but from different timelines. And that was exacerbated by how similar some of these characters looked. Lots of great crowd scenes, lots of stuff going on in the background, really good Pérez background stuff, lots of explosions and starburst patterns. There's one panel on here where there's a bunch of starburst patterns, typical Pérez stuff, but lovely, just the same. I really like the way that he draws hair. Hair is distinctive and alive. Well, not literally, but it's a lot of artists just kind of draw hair as something stiff and static on the page, and Pérez doesn't do that. It's one of the things I love about his work. However, something that I've long felt about Pérez's work, when he inks his own stuff, I tend to like Pérez being inked by somebody else. I'm partial to Romeo Tangle, who did a lot of his inking when he was on New Teen Titans. There were some others I can't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, I find Pérez's inks to be a little too heavy, a little too, in some cases, blobby on the page, and I see that here. But to his defense, he said in this very same interview that I quoted from, because of his eye surgery, he had to adjust how he did his work, his inking in particular. Yeah, he said, I had to alter my inking style a bit to accommodate the optic issues. But he seems to be impressing a lot of people with the quality of his work despite that. And that's very true. I mean, this is good work. It does remind me, I thought a lot about when Pérez inked his own work. I believe it was on the Baxter edition of the New Teen Titans, that secondary series they came out with. I think it was 1984. I think he inked his own, at least the first issue or two, he inked his own work. And I remember that stuff being very similar to what I'm seeing here with Sirens. There is one thing in here I just want to mention, and it's such a little thing, but it's the little things that really make me appreciate Pérez's work. And I have to admit, this may be more of the colorist, but there's a scene in the 1949 pages where one of the characters is holding a china teacup. And the teacup has this beautiful, looks like a flower pattern on it. But the way that the flower pattern is drawn on here or colored on here, and the way that you get sort of the reflection of the light off the cup, and the holding plate as well, it looks just like china I've seen. I mean, recreated in a comic book fashion, but it looks pretty darn real. And I just love that little bit. There are 3 panels showing the same cup, and you see that the flower color pattern on here in all 3 panels. And one of the panels, that china dish and cup are the focus of the panel. So I just really appreciate that. It's one of those, like I said, one of those little touches, those little details that makes Pérez's work, or at least the book in which he's working, come alive for me. So I really appreciate that. I really enjoy that kind of stuff. Let's see, what else? So again, typical Pérez written stuff. If you've read his Wonder Woman series from the 1980s, or more recently his Superman, when they relaunched Superman in the New 52, when Pérez was doing that, there's a lot of dialogue, a lot of word balloons throughout this. It's very talky, it's very wordy, but at the same time, you get a lot of, essentially you get a lot of story out of it, or at least a lot of characterization through this. There's a lot of characters, like I said, not just the main characters. There's a lot of supporting characters. There's just so many characters, so much dialogue, so much going on, all the time hopping. It's just it seems like a little much, but it's setting up this universe, and there's a lot to it. So I can kind of forgive that nature, if you will, and there are dragons. Well, there's a dragon in this, but there's a race of dragon-like creatures called the Drago or Drago. I'll just say Drago. That appear in the far future, which I just think is cool. So you got dragon men in here. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what the next 5 issues of this are like. As Pérez said in the interviews that I read, basically there's so many of these characters and so many of the backstories that he can deal with, that's partly the reason he set up the story in the way that he did, so that he could be challenged, as a writer, as an artist as well. He mentioned specifically in one of the interviews that he's doing a story set in feudal Japan, so he had to do a lot of research there. So like I said, I'm really looking forward to this, to seeing all these characters and their backstories, and then continuing the plot that has been set up, that's set in the far future as well, how they save the universe, everyone's relation to this Nyada character and Perdition, and who everybody is and what their role is, and how everything will end up at the end of this, and hopefully beyond. So I'm already looking forward to the next series. Next up is Thor #1 from Marvel Comics. This is written by Jason Aaron with art by Russell Dodderman. Matthew Wilson on colors, and Joe Sabino from VC doing the letters. Okay, so this is the new Thor, the new female Thor, that is continuing the story that Jason Aaron has been telling for a couple years now. There's a great. I love the logo of this. It's THOR, but the crossbar, the H and the O is Mjolnir, is Thor's hammer. So I thought that was really cute. Basically, the story opens with some rocks and people in the ocean. They get attacked by some frost giants, and this cool 2-page spread. This big scene where the frost giants are about ready to attack this undersea laboratory. And then we go to the moon, where members of Asgardia are there talking about Thor to Odin, who has returned recently. And basically, ever since Thor became unworthy in the original Sin miniseries not too long ago, he's been on the moon. The poor guy, he's been on the moon. He's now got a beard because he's just been sitting there on the moon, talking to Mjolnir, saying, please, please move. And of course, Odin wants none of that. He's yelling at him, and he's harping on his wife, basically saying, I have returned. Everybody shut up and listen to me. I might be paraphrasing just a bit there. The Warriors 3 tell Odin how everybody has tried to lift the hammer and nobody is worthy. Odin says, okay, this is ridiculous. He says, stand aside, boy. And he shoves Thor out of the way. What an ass. I mean, I've seen Odin be portrayed as a real dick. But here he's the uber dick. He says, this folly ends now, and he tries to lift it. Move, you blasted hunk of Uru. Odin commands thee. And of course it doesn't. And Odin throws a god-level temper tantrum, and energies flash around as he tries to pick up the hammer and get the hammer to move. And in the meantime, Freya goes over to her son, and tells him, rise, let the hammer be damned. Rise and remember the hero that you are. It's then that the people of Asgardia find out that the frost giants have invaded Midgard, so they go off to prepare for war. Thor gets up, and he says he's going home. After he goes to the armory, the Hall of Weapons, he calls it, and that's when he gets his axe, the axe that we've seen before. I believe it's the same axe. The axe that he's seen before, that we've seen before in the flashback story in the previous volume that Jason Aaron wrote. Let's see. Freya and Odin have some final words before the scene shifts. Odin tells her, it is time you remembered your place in the world, Freya. And he leaves, and she says, yes, as she looks at the hammer, perhaps it is. Anyway, we find out that the frost giant invasion was instigated by Malekith, which, by the way, not one of my favorite villains. And we just had a story featuring Malekith, so yet we haven't yet another one. I don't know. So Thor comes with his axe and fights the frost giants and Malekith, and poor Thor loses his left arm, part of his left arm. So you see Malekith swinging. Looks like Thor's axe too. Yeah, it's Thor's axe. He picks up Thor's axe and then whacks Thor's arm off with it. And then a few panels later, you see Thor's arm kind of floating there at the bottom of the ocean floor with blood all around it. It's kind of disgusting. Which of course that sets up what we saw in the previous volume where King Thor has a metal arm. So I guess anyway, there you go. Final scene, we go back to the moon and focusing on Mjolnir. Somebody says there must always be a Thor, and then a female hand is reaching down, grabs the hammer, and the enchantment that is written upon Mjolnir changes. Instead of saying, if he be worthy, it now says, if she be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. And the final page is the hammer being lifted by this new female Thor, which one presumes is Freya, right? She's got the same blonde hair, or blondish hair, although it's not quite the same. It's not quite colored the same. So maybe it's one of Freya's agents. And like I said, I've only read number 1. So I don't remember if Thor number 2 is out at the time that I'm recording this, but I haven't read it yet if it is. So I don't know. And I think maybe that Jason Aaron had said that he was trying to keep the character's identity secret for a while, which is kind of nice. It's a nice little mystery. Important here is there's a letter in here and lo, there came the hammergrams letter page of this issue. There's a critical letter from a fan, and I won't read it, but basically Jason Aaron's response to that is, this is a continuation of a story that he came up with, and this is just the next step in that story. It's not some sort of attention-grabbing stunt. It's just a part of the story. Now, whether or not that's true, I don't know. I tend to trust in the creators and what they say. I tend not to think that they're actually just lying to us outright. So I thought that was kind of nice to get that out of the way, because that's what a lot of the response on the internet was when I read about this new female Thor taking over the book. I have no problem with this. I think it's great to see a different character take on the mantle for a while. I'm a huge fan of over at DC, where they have that, or did anyway, before the New 52, they have that generational aspect to their heroes. So it's kind of nice to see something similar. I mean, this is not a generational thing, but it is a continuation or an examination of the character from a slightly different lens, if you will. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this turns out. And Jason Aaron has been writing a great Thor since the beginning of that last series that just ended. I think it was number 25. That has been just a great story from beginning to end, with maybe a small exception about Malekith, but that's just my personal preference about that character. Next up is the October Faction. This is from IDW. This is by Steve Niles doing the writing, and Damian Worm doing the art. Robbie Robbins is the letterer on this as well, and I know that Niles and Worm did something together, and I'm not thinking of it at the moment. Oh, it's Monster and Madman. That's what it is. Which I don't think I really heard about this. I may have heard the title, but I didn't know what it was about. Now, after reading this first issue of the October Faction, I kind of want to go back and read that story. There's actually an ad at the back of this number 1 book. That says The Secret History of Jack the Ripper and Frankenstein's Monster. That's an interesting pairing. So I may have to check that out. I'm sure it's in trade. I'll have to go buy that. Anyway, the October Faction. So on the very front cover, you see these 4 characters. They are the family. I don't know that we actually get their last name in the story. If it's in here, I missed it. But here we go. The blurb on the cover is retired monster hunter, thrill killer, warlock, and witch. Sometimes crazy is the glue that binds a family together. And so basically this whole story is setting up the characters. Essentially, there's not much plot to it. There's just a lot of character moments, character scenes. But it's interesting at the very least. So we first get introduced to the son, who is Jeff. We do see the mother very briefly in the panel. But Jeff is recently graduated. Well, the end of the last school year anyway. So he's out of high school, and he happens across a former high school friend, or high school, not friend, a former high school person that he went to high school with. He's a jock. The jock gives him a bad time, but then there's Jeff makes some quick quip about the guy. Shouldn't he be tormenting college freshmen? And the guy blows up. I lost my football scholarship, and there was an accident. And then Jeff starts getting a little creepy, and that's when Jeff gets in the panels. He's shown as hovering behind this high school jock, and his face is usually in shadow, and he's just presented as really dark, which is nice. And the panels start getting more and more, more and more confined, more and more claustrophobic, which helps elevate the emotion, or the emotional impact that is supposed to be going on with this kid. Anyway, Jeff talks about how essentially the ghosts of the people that were killed in the car accident, that Rick is the guy's name. No, not Rick. Rick is one of the guys that died. Philip is the guy's name. Philip was driving. He was drunk. He caused the death. And then you see this panel where the three other jocks that were riding in the car that are dead, their spirits are just climbing all over Philip and weighing him down, I guess. So I'm not sure if Philip actually sees this, or this is just a representation of what Philip is talking about for our convenience. But it's quite possible that Jeff actually can see spirits, which may be quite true based on a later scene in this. Next we're introduced to the father, Frederick. He's an older guy. He's teaching, I assume, a college class here, but he's teaching a class about monsters. One of the students says, "What a freak job," and this other guy says, "Yeah, but best class ever." Then we meet one of Frederick's old friends, Lucas. They apparently were monster hunters together in the past. Let's see, it's been almost 40 years since they worked together, so a very long time. And then we get a flashback scene of them working together, just real quick. It's interesting, there's a couple of flashback scenes in this, and they're presented in black and white instead of the color palette, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, of the events in the present time. Lucas tells Frederick that he ran across Frederick's wife, whose name is Dolores. She was meeting with this person named Merle Cope, who gave her a key, and that plays into the final scene of this. And then we meet Vivian, who is the daughter, who is still in high school, runs across some high school girls who are giving her a bad time, sort of like Philip did with Jeff at the beginning. And we get another scene where this one of the children of this family sees things that aren't actually, they're not real in the sense of how you see someone, but she sees these girls not as they are, but who they will become in 20 years. And they're not looking good. They're smoking, they're fat, they're ugly. So essentially either she's seeing how things will turn out in the future, or she's seeing how they really are inside, and eventually time will turn them into these things that they already are. I'm not sure. She goes home, meets up with Jeff. Jeff reveals to her that he was able to conjure up a spirit that was in the house, in a somewhat creepy scene, because she opens the door and here's this. You only get the one panel kind of showing. Well, I guess there's two panels showing this ghost face, and you really only get to see the face and a bit of the torso because it's really dark. Just like a lot of this comic, there's a lot of black, a lot of dark colors in this comic, and the ghost kind of looks kind of like almost clown-like in the face, but it's not really. I don't know. It's hard to describe. Anyway, the children are very excited because now they say, "Can he turn us down now?" And she says, Dad, he'll find a way, I'm sure. So they're bucking for some sort of promotion, if you will, I guess, with them. And like I said, the final scene, go back to Dolores. So she has the key and she goes into this storage facility, opens it up, and there's a box in there. And there's a creature in it with some sort of device around its mouth. I'm guessing this is a vampire. And she leans down and says, "Wake up." Thus setting up the October faction. I got this comic because I liked some of Steve Niles' stuff. This comic looks sufficiently dark and sort of creepy to me. And so I decided to take a chance on it. It's that time of year after all. And although this is an ongoing, it's not like a limited series story for this time of year type publication. So we'll see how it turns out. I like the whole monster hunter type stuff. Although I'm really curious, I get that, so Frederick is I go back to what was on the book, the cover. He's the retired monster hunter. The kids are the warlock and witch. And so that means the mother is the thrill killer. So I'm really curious what that really means for this character. She's shown in the cover with a bottle of poison in her lap. So if she's a thrill killer, I mean, if you take that word by how it's typically used, she can't be that good of a person. So, but yet she's the mother of these children. These guys are married, although their relationship is strained at the moment. So I'm really curious what Dolores' role in all this is. So far, I'm liking it. Like I said, the colors are really muted. There's lots of deep reds, browns, blacks all throughout this. I believe all the pages, I'm just flipping through it real quick at this moment. Yeah, all the pages are the background. Instead of, most comics are either the art is bled out to the edges, or they're white backgrounds most of the time. But this one has black background for everything, so it's sufficiently dark. Some of the art, especially the backgrounds and buildings in here, seem almost I want to say photo manipulated in some way, photorealistic to an extent, which I don't mind. I mean, it adds an eerie quality to the work, to the page art that I like, and I think contributes to the overall tone of the book. But man, it's kind of hard for me to read with the way that the pages, they're kind of glossy, so they reflect light really easily. And so I constantly have to kind of move the book around in my hands to try and make sure that I'm not getting glare off of the lights above me when I read it, because it kind of obstructs what I'm seeing in some panels anyway. But like I said, it's sufficiently dark and kind of creepy, and I like it. Okay, finally, I have a number one from DC, and let me tell you, this is the runt of the litter. This is the worst of the bunch, if you will. I'm not going to say this. It's not necessarily a bad comic, but it's certainly not to the level of the others. But it is a number one, and it is Earth 2: World's End. This is the number one of the new weekly series put out by DC Comics, and I have to say, yet again, it's weak in comparison to New 52, Future's End, and Batman Eternal, at least from what I remember about how the number ones of those particular stories started. I felt, especially with Batman Eternal, I felt immersed in the story. New 52, Future's End, I easily got into the story. This is 5 years later, something has happened. I didn't need to know exactly what happened, but I got enough information that we could just get into the story and on with the characters. Earth 2: World's End is really just a recap of everything that we've seen so far in the comic Earth 2. So much of this it's recapping a lot of the invasion from Apocalypse, the response of the heroes and the world government. We do get a little bit of background information about some of the characters and how they got to where they were at the point that we joined Earth 2 initially. So that was kind of nice, to fill in those little details, I guess. But otherwise, it's just, throughout much of the book, it's just recapping everything, like I said, from the beginning of Earth 2 to where we are with, I believe it's Earth 2 number 27. At this point, Huntress and Power Girl are back on Earth 2. And then at the end of the comic, some of the fire pits explode with these creatures. I believe these are the female Furies coming out of the fire pits to start the war all over again. And Killy or Klee, it's K''Li. I want to say Killy. Fury of Apocalypse arrives with our heroes Batman, the new Superman, Green Lantern, Lois Lane as Red Tornado, and Huntress and Power Girl there. It's interesting because this Killy person, she's got golden skin, auburn hair, and green eyes. So it reminds me a lot of Coriander. So is this the Starfire of Earth 2? I don't know. Although Apocalypse is not part of Earth 2. Apocalypse is his own dimension, as I'm pretty sure anyway. So I don't know. I did do some checking, and it looks like Kali is a new character, but she's part of the Female Furies. I forgot to mention who this is by. And so this might play into my lack of excitement about this book. Generally, if there's a lot of creators involved with the book, it tends to be a watered down production. And that's kind of how I'm thinking of this. Okay, so here's the story. The story is by Daniel H. Wilson, written by Daniel H. Wilson, Marguerite Bennett, and Mike Johnson. Art by Ardian Syaf and Sandra Hope and Danny Mickey. Jorge Jimenez, Eddie Barrows, and Eber Ferreira. Paulo Siqueira, and Cam Smith. Breakdowns by Scott McDaniel. Lettering by Desi Siente. Colors by John Calise, Alan Passalacqua, and Jason Wright. So, a lot of people on this. I mean, it is I believe it's an oversized issue, but still, it just, I don't know. I wasn't all that impressed by it, except for one part of it. And this is just a purely personal thing because I love Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson of Earth 2 is introduced here. He is a reporter, or a journalist anyway. He mentioned, or he refers to himself as a kind of journalist. Not kind of as in sort of. Let me just read it. I know how you feel. What kind of journalist am I if I can't get out in the world and report on what's happening? Anyway, he's married to Barbara Gordon in this, and they have a son. I believe his name is John. Yeah, Johnny. So I thought that was kind of cool. So there's a few pages featuring this Dick Grayson character and Barbara. So I'm really curious what role Dick Grayson will play here, because as far as I know, he was never involved with Batman on this Earth. That was Helena as the Robin character. So will Dick Grayson become Nightwing on this world? That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Well, interesting to me anyway. I do have to admit, though, I am somewhat interested in where World's End goes. But we've already seen a possible future based on the events of this particular story in the New 52 Future's End, because that mentions many times the war with Earth 2 and the refugees from Earth 2 and how they're treated on our main Earth, Prime Earth. I don't know what they call it anymore. Is it Earth 1? I don't know. I believe they call it Prime Earth or Earth Prime or whatever. But anyway, so I'm really curious how those particular series sync up in the end. And then, of course, what comes after all these weekly series in the DC universe. So there you go. My looks at a bunch of new number ones, some more recent than others. SIP Kids from Terry Moore, Sirens from George Pérez, Thor, Jason Aaron, and Dodderman doing the art, October Faction, Steve Niles and Damian Worm, and a bunch of people working on Earth 2 World's End. Did you read all these books? What did you think about them? I'd love to know, especially if you have any opinions about what I've said about these books. If you do, you can always email me at longboxreview@gmail.com. You can leave feedback at the website, along with various other ways to contact me. Just go to longboxreview.com and click the contact/feedback button, and there's a bunch of different ways you can get a hold of me. If you don't mind, would you please leave me a review on iTunes? And, just tell people about the podcast. If you like the show, let the people that you know that read comic books and like comic books, let them know that there's a show out there they should listen to. At least give it a chance, anyway. I'd appreciate it very much. Until next time, thanks for listening.